They are coming. The ice groans beneath their hooves. A lament I feel in my soul, whispered Xenia, the blind elder, as the eternal darkness in her eyes was filled by the terrifying sound of 800 Arctic wolverines, hungry and larger than any wolf, surrounding the last herd of 1,000 reindeer, the ultimate hope of her village. The biting wind howled the truth, and she felt death approaching, a tremor in the frozen ground, knowing that the fate of all rested on her blindness, and on what the winter still held in its icy depths. The icy breeze whipped Ksenia's wrinkled face, but she barely felt it. Her thin fingers, calloused by decades of labor and prayer, groped the air as if they could touch the very threat. The sound of the wolverine's heavy footsteps was a deep, constant drum, reverberating not only in the ground, but in her bones, a macabre melody that heralded the end. She could distinguish the low, hungry growl, the occasional snap of branches under enormous paws, and the rustle of snow accumulating on their thick pelts. To the others, it was just the howl of the wind and the fear that paralyzed them. But for Ksenia, every sound was a word, every vibration a story. At the entrance to the main tent, Ayana, a young mother with eyes wide with dread, watched Ksenia. Her small son, Yura, nestled against her trembling. Ayana was barely 20 winters old, and the elder's wisdom was a beacon in her life. But now, even Ksenia seemed enveloped in an aura of silent despair. Ayana's hands clutched her chest, feeling the racing beat of her own heart. How could they survive? The herd, 1,000 reindeer, was the village's life. Without them, the cold and hunger would be relentless. Tears streamed down Ayana's face, freezing into tiny crystals on her cheeks. She wanted to scream, to run, to do something. But terror held her captive. Xenia, oblivious to the panicked gazes, removed her reindeer hide gloves, exposing her hands to the elements. The biting cold bit her skin, but she did not flinch. Her bare feet, accustomed to the touch of the frozen earth even inside her fur boots, craved a more intimate contact. She needed to feel the ground, the ice, the very pulse of Yakutia. With a deep sigh, Xenia sat in the snow, legs crossed, and carefully took off her heavy boots. The shock of the intense cold made her body tremble, but she focused. Her feet, sensitive as antennae, began to explore the icy surface, searching for any clue, any message from the ground. She felt the granular texture of the snow, the relentless hardness of the ice beneath, and then the vibrations. Not just those of the wolverines, but the subtle cracks in the ice crust, the murmurs of the earth under the weight of the blizzard. It was as if the world was speaking directly to her, revealing its deepest secrets. Xenia closed her eyes, though for her it made no difference. Her mind, however, opened. Images of jagged mountains, of a frozen lake with dangerous fissures, began to form in her consciousness. These were not visions, but rather the decoding of sensations, the interpretation of a language few understood. A thread of hope, fragile as an ice crystal, began to form in Xenia's chest. The invisible path, the labyrinth of frozen mountains, and the cracked ice lake that the premise mentioned was beginning to reveal itself. She knew the task was impossible in anyone's eyes, but blindness had given her a different way of seeing. Her connection to the earth, forged in years of darkness and dependence on other senses, was her greatest strength. Xenia raised her head, a faint smile appearing on her chapped lips. It was not a smile of joy, but of determination. The village would not be surrendered to hunger and cold. Not while she could feel the ground beneath her feet and hear the whispers of the wind. The life of her people depended on it, and she would be the compass that would guide them through the darkness. Xenia, with the smile of determination on her lips, rose with agility. Her bare feet, tingling with the vitality of the ice, felt firm, connected to the earth. She felt Ayana's gaze, heavy with fear and faint hope, and turned. Ayana, her voice was a hoarse whisper imbued with authority, gather the strongest. We need to move the herd. Ayana blinked, incredulity clouding her eyes. Move the herd, Elder. To where? The wolverines are everywhere. The ice, the lake is cracked, the mountains impassable. Her voice choked, panic threatening to overwhelm her. She looked at her son, Yura, who watched her with curiosity, oblivious to the gravity. Moving 1,000 reindeer, surrounded by 800 giant predators through treacherous terrain, seemed like madness. Xenia extended a hand, conveying confidence. I see the way, my daughter, not with my eyes, but with my heart and the earth. There is a narrow and perilous passage, the only chance. The lake has fissures, yes, but also footholds, the mountains shelters. She paused. The wolverines are many, but they are creatures of instinct. We can deceive them. Ayana's hope, once a thin thread, began to weave into something robust, driven by the elder's conviction. Xenia never spoke lightly. Her wisdom was the backbone of the village, her faith a pillar. With a hesitant nod, Ayana hugged Yura tighter and ran to warn the others. The wind, which had seemed a lament, now carried a sense of urgency and action. As Ayana hurried, Xenia walked towards the herd. Her bare feet sank into the snow, but the contact with the ground was a constant source of information. She felt the agitation of the reindeer, the fear that huddled them together, their hooves nervously tapping. The wolverines were getting closer, their low, deep growls echoing in the icy vastness. Xenia felt the vibration of their heavy footsteps, the hunger pulsing through the earth. She stopped a few meters from the reindeer, raising her hands to the grey sky. Her lips began to move, chanting an ancient song, a melody that spoke of the earth, the ice, the spirits of YAKUT. It was not a loud song, but it possessed a deep resonance, a vibration that seemed to penetrate the icy air and calm the frightened hearts of the reindeer. They raised their heads, their large dark eyes fixed on the blind figure, as if they understood the promise in her voice. Xenia's song was a tapestry of sounds, each note a thread of hope. She not only sang, but connected, her soul intertwining with the essence of the place. The wolverines, for a moment, seemed to hesitate, their growls diminishing, confused by the strange melody. It was the beginning of the distraction the elder planned. She would use her voice and connection to create a veil of deception, a diversion for the predators, while guiding her people along a path only she could see. The men and women of the village, led by a more confident Ayana, began to approach, their faces marked by apprehension, but also by renewed determination. They trusted Xenia, even without understanding how she would do the impossible. The elder, with her bare feet on the ice, the ancestral melody flowing from her lips, was ready to face the fury of the Arctic. The labyrinth of mountains and the cracked lake awaited, and Xenia, the spiritual compass of her people, was about to begin the most perilous journey of their lives. The men and women of the village, faces hardened by cold and arduous life, but now pale with apprehension, formed a hesitant semicircle. They watched Xenia, the blind elder, with her bare feet in the snow, chanting the ancestral melody. The sound of the wolverines, previously muffled, seemed to intensify, a constant reminder of the threat. Among them was Boris, a robust hunter, his beard covered in ice, who had always relied on brute force. Now, he felt powerless. His eyes met Ayana's, who held Yura, and a silent understanding passed between them. Everyone's life depended on faith in something they could not see. Xenia felt their presence, the mix of fear and hope pulsing in the icy air. She lowered her hands, the chant diminishing to a soft murmur. "Listen," she said, her voice strong despite the whisper. "Every step will be a prayer. The wolverines are cunning, but they are also guided by hunger and sound. My song will confuse them, drawing them away from our path. You must move the reindeer with silence and gentleness. There is no room for panic. The slightest mistake, the slightest cry, and all will be lost. She turned in the direction she felt was safest, a point between two rocky elevations barely discernible in the blizzard. Boris, you and the strongest will go ahead, clearing the way. Ayana, you and the women will stay in the middle of the herd, calming the reindeer, the youngest and the elders behind, ensuring no one gets lost. Follow the sound of my voice, but do not touch me. I need to feel every tremor of the earth. Boris nodded, his mouth a thin line. The idea of trusting a blind woman to guide them through an invisible labyrinth was frightening, but the conviction in Senior's eyes was undeniable. He moved, gathering the hunters, their faces reflecting the same mix of skepticism and desperation. The reindeer, 1,000 of them, huddled, their bodies exuding warmth and fear. Senior resumed her song, a more rhythmic melody now that seemed to whisper to the animals, encouraging them to move. Slowly, with the soft snow muffling their steps, the herd began to move. Xenia led the way, her bare feet feeling the ground, each toe an extension of her perception. She felt the change in snow density, the subtle incline of the terrain, the distant echo of the wolverines' growls, which, indeed, seemed to recede, drawn by the elders' hypnotic chant. It was as if the music created an invisible veil, a sonic illusion that diverted the predators. Ayana, with Yura firmly strapped to her back, walked among the reindeer, her hands touching the thick fur of the animals, conveying a calm she barely felt. Her heart pounded, but the sound of Senior's song and the sight of the elder, so small and fragile, yet so powerful, propelled her forward. The air was heavy with the smell of reindeer and the intense cold. They were entering the labyrinth. The first part of the path was a narrow passage between the rocks, where the wind howled with redoubled fury. Xenia felt the ice beneath her feet become more irregular, with small fissures that opened and closed with the weight of the reindeer. She adjusted her song, changing the tone, the frequency, as if she were mapping the path with sound. Every step was a gamble, an act of blind faith. The entire village, 1,000 reindeer and hundreds of lives, followed the echo of a voice and the intuition of a woman who saw with her soul. The abyss waited for a mistake, but Xenia did not allow fear to take hold. With every vibration, every whisper of the wind, she became the very incarnation of resilience. The narrow gorge was a challenge. The dark, jagged rocks swallowed the meager light of the blizzard. Xenia, with bare feet, felt every irregularity of the ice, every loose stone under the snow. She guided with a sensory cartography of decades. Her toes felt the terrain, detecting minimal changes in ice density like a braille map. The chant, now more melodic, spread through the rocks, echoing to confuse the wolverines, a sonic curtain. Boris, at the head of the hunters, cleared the way with an axe, breaking the ice. He sweated beneath his furs, the physical exertion contrasting with Senior's lightness. His eyes, accustomed to scanning the tundra, were useless in the blizzard's darkness. He looked back at the diminutive figure of the elder, feeling admiration and dread. How did she know? How could she feel the path that he, with his sight, barely discerned? With each step his faith deepened, but fear persisted, a knot in his stomach. Ayana was in the heart of the herd, with Yura on her back. The reindeer, guided by the hunters and the hypnotic chant, moved. She heard the murmur of the villagers, the crunch of snow, the rustle of furs. But what terrified her most was the occasional silence. When the wind diminished and the distant sound of the wolverines seemed to approach, a deep growl that sent shivers down her spine. She hugged Yura tighter, her breath forming small clouds. "Everything will be fine, my love," she whispered, more to herself than to her son, trying to believe. Xenia, oblivious to doubt, focused. She felt a gradual descent. The lake was approaching. The ice beneath her feet emitted a deep, dangerous groan. Fissures, previously subtle, pulsed on the frozen surface. The lake would be the greatest challenge, a minefield. Her bare feet, her only probe and hope. She stopped abruptly, raising a hand. The chant ceased, the group stopped, tense. "The lake!" she announced, her voice low, urgent. "It is here. The ice is thin. We need to go in single file with extreme caution. Feel the ground before stepping, the reindeer one by one." Boris approached, his brow furrowed. "Elder, we cannot see the cracks. How will we know where to step?" Ksenia turned her head in his direction, her eyes empty. "You will feel it, Boris. The earth speaks. Trust your feet and heart. I will go ahead. Follow my trail. But do not step where I stepped. The weight of many can be fatal." She resumed the chant, now with a sharper melody, almost a lament that mingled with the groan of the ice. Ksenia's first step on the lake was slow and deliberate. She felt the vibration, the tension beneath the surface, the promise of breakage. Her bare feet, sensitive, were her eyes. She found a path, an invisible line of greater stability, deviating from the imperceptible cracks under the snow. With each step, the ice cracked and groaned, but did not yield. Ksenia's courage was a beacon, and the villagers' faith, previously fragile, solidified with each safe movement. The abyss was beneath them, but hope, guided by the blind woman, refused to freeze. The abyss was beneath them, but hope, guided by the blind woman, refused to freeze. Ksenia advanced, each step a symphony of sensations. Her bare feet, now numb with cold, were precision tools, reading the minuscule variations on the ice surface. She felt the pressure, the elasticity, the subterranean murmur of the dark water below. The ice groaned, a deep lament that resonated in her chest, but Ksenia discerned the points of greater resistance, the invisible paths that the earth revealed to her. Her chant, now an almost inaudible melody, was a magical thread that wove safety, a prayer that calmed the ice and guided hearts. Boris, axe in hand, followed Ksenia's trail, but with each step, cold sweat ran down his spine. The ground beneath his boots felt deceptive, and he felt the crack of the ice, a sound that was once just a detail of the landscape, now a premonition of catastrophe. His eyes, accustomed to traversing the snow, were useless here. He depended only on the elder's intuition and the faith she inspired. He looked back at the endless line of reindeer and villagers, their faces marked by exhaustion and fear. With each movement, Boris felt the weight of everyone on his shoulders, the responsibility of not failing in the task of clearing the way, even if he could not see where he was going. Ayana, with Yura asleep on her back, wrapped in furs, felt the cold penetrate her clothes. She walked with her head down, her eyes fixed on the reindeer's hooves in front of her, trying to ignore the terrifying sound of cracking ice. Ksenia's song was a balm, a lullaby for the soul, but fear was a persistent monster, whispering about the abyss. She clenched her fists, remembering the determination in the elder's empty eyes. If Ksenia could do this, so could she. Her hand gently touched a reindeer's fur, conveying a calm she hoped was genuine. Suddenly, a louder crack than the others echoed, making Ayana's heart jump. A visible crack, dark and menacing, snaked across the ice surface, a few meters from where Boris had just passed. A murmur of panic ran through the line. Ksenia stopped, her chant ceasing for an instant. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only by the howl of the wind and the racing beat of hearts. Ksenia raised her head, her lips moving in a new tone, deeper and more urgent. She felt the vibration of the crack, the instability of that point. Her bare feet, previously moving with caution, now seemed to dance on the ice, deviating with surprising agility. She was mapping the danger in real time, using the resonance of the ice as a guide. Don't look down. Follow the sound of my voice, one step at a time. Her voice, though low, cut through the air with unwavering clarity. Boris felt the ground tremble beneath his feet. He looked at the crack and then at Ksenia, who now moved with an almost supernatural speed for someone her age. The elder was not just guiding, she was defying the ice itself, her courage a barrier against despair. He took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a second, and trusting blindly in the elder, took the next step. Faith was the only compass they had. Faith was the only compass they had. Boris took the next step, feeling the ice beneath his boots creak, a dry, alarming sound that made his heart clench. He dared not look back, but the image of the dark crack was still etched in his mind. Ksenia, ahead, moved with a grace that belied her age and the precariousness of the terrain. Her bare feet seemed to float, finding a rhythm, a cadence that the ice, by some miracle, seemed to accept. Her chant, now an ethereal lament, was a shield against panic, a melody that spoke of hidden paths and the unshakable strength of the earth. Ayana, with Yura still asleep on her back, felt the cold paralyze her fingers, but the warmth of her son's body was a constant reminder of why she was there. The sound of cracking ice was a constant whisper in her ears, and with each crack she flinched, expecting the worst. Her eyes scanned the foggy horizon, searching for a point of reference, anything that was not the infinite white and the invisible threat. But there was nothing but Ksenia's diminutive figure and the endless line of reindeer, moving like a slow, silent river. She wondered if the elder was truly seeing something they did not, or if it was just blind faith, a last act of desperation. Suddenly, the ground beneath the hooves of a group of reindeer, about 20 meters from Boris, gave way with a terrifying crash. It was not a total collapse, but a section of ice sank, creating a crater of dark, icy water. 3 reindeer, caught by surprise, fell into the water, their legs struggling desperately against the paralyzing cold and the invisible current. Their screams of dread echoed, breaking the tense silence and plunging the village into immediate panic. The villagers behind them stopped abruptly, some screaming, others paralyzed by terror. Ksenia stopped abruptly, her body tense as a bowstring. The chant ceased. She felt the vibration of the collapse, the shockwave that spread across the ice, and the desperate agitation of the reindeer in the water. The smell of fear and the sound of breaking ice were deafening to her sharpened senses. She raised her hands, not to the sky, but to the earth, as if to touch the tragedy itself. Her lips moved rapidly, chanting a new melody, faster, more urgent, almost a command. "Don't look, don't stop, keep moving. Boris, the hunters, get the ropes, quick, the ice won't hold much longer." Ksenia's voice, though still low, carried an urgency that cut through the panic. She did not turn, but her bare feet began to move in a new direction, an abrupt detour from the previous path. She was remapping the path in her mind, finding a new route to safety amidst the chaos. Boris, despite the shock, reacted instantly. Ksenia's cry awakened him. Ropes! Quick!" he stammered, but his voice found strength. The hunters, trained for quick action, were already grabbing ropes from their backpacks. They approached the edge of the crater, where the reindeer struggled, their eyes wide with fear. The ice beneath them felt unstable, but the urgency was greater than the danger. Ayana, with Yura clutched against her, watched the scene unfold. Panic threatened to engulf her, but Ksenia's voice, firm and decisive, pulled her back. She looked at the elder, who now moved with impressive speed, her bare feet dancing on the ice, mapping the new path. Ayana's faith, once wavering, solidified into an unshakable rock. Ksenia not only saw the path, she created it with her courage. The abyss had opened, but the blind compass of her people was charting a new route, more dangerous, but still possible. The journey had become even more treacherous, but the elder's resilience was the flame that illuminated the darkness. Boris, driven by Senior's urgent command, threw the first rope. The lasso hissed in the icy air and fell near one of the reindeer struggling in the dark water. The hunters, their faces pale with effort and apprehension, followed suit, casting other ropes. The ice beneath their feet cracked menacingly, but the sight of the reindeer fighting for their lives, their screams of dread echoing in the air, was a call stronger than fear. They knelt, digging their feet into the ice, and began to pull. Every muscle tense, every breath a cloud of vapor. The cold water, which was already beginning to freeze the animal's fur, made the task even more arduous. Xenia, oblivious to the direct drama of the crater, but feeling every vibration of despair and effort, continued to move. Her bare feet, now with even greater urgency, felt the ice, searching for a new route. Her chant had changed again, transforming into a pulsating melody, a constant rhythm that seemed to calm the ice and guide the herd. She felt the instability beneath her toes, the promise of new cracks, but her mind, a living map, recalibrated the path with each step. She could not stop. Time was an enemy as relentless as the cold and the wolverines who, she knew, could be attracted by the noise of the rescue. The survival of all depended on her unshakable courage. Ayana, with Yura still asleep and heavy on her back, watched the hunters struggling with the reindeer. Her heart pounded erratically, a mix of terror and a growing admiration for Boris's courage and the others. But her eyes always returned to Ksenia, the diminutive figure ahead, who moved with unshakable determination. The elder did not look back, did not falter. It was as if she knew that any hesitation on her part could mean the loss of everyone. Ayana felt a wave of strength, an echo of Ksenia's resilience, and began to whisper to the reindeer around her, stroking their thick fur, encouraging them to continue following the elder's voice. With a desperate, concerted effort, the hunters managed to drag the first reindeer out of the water. The animal, exhausted and trembling, could barely stand. Boris and two other men, ignoring the danger, used their bodies to push it forward, to join the herd that Ksenia continued to guide. Then the second, and finally the third reindeer was pulled out, wet and shivering, but alive. The relief was palpable. A collective sigh that mingled with the vapor of their breaths. Boris, his hands numb and body exhausted, looked at Ksenia, who was already a good distance away, charting the new path. Deep gratitude and unshakable faith filled his chest. The elder not only saw what they could not, she made them believe in the impossible. The rescue party hurried to catch up with the herd, pushing the saved reindeer, who now moved with difficulty, but with life still pulsing in their bodies. Senior's new path was more winding, with unexpected turns and detours, but the ice beneath her feet seemed more stable, as if the elder was weaving a trail of safety through danger. Her chant, now a constant murmur, was the only compass in that white desert. With each step, the village moved away from the ice crater and the immediate threat, but the journey was far from over. The lake still stretched ahead, vast and treacherous, and the wolverines, though temporarily distracted, were still a shadow lurking in the icy darkness. Hope, fragile as ice but warmed by Senior's courage, persisted, a beacon of light. Senior continued to guide. Her bare feet, now wounded and with painful blisters, were the only compass in that sea of ice. Every step was agony, but the elder did not allow the pain to show on her face. Maintaining an expression of serene concentration, the chant, once a continuous and powerful flow, now came in waves, an intermittent murmur that seemed to extract the last forces from her body and soul. She felt the ice beneath her feet, not just the texture and density, but the very memory of the lake, the subterranean currents that shaped it, the fissures that formed and closed like open wounds. It was a dance with death, where with each movement, Ksenia reaffirmed life, a silent testament to her unshakable will. Boris, his body heavy with exhaustion, could barely keep pace. The saved reindeer, though alive, were an extra burden, and he and the other hunters pushed them with the last shred of energy they had left. The ice beneath his boots felt even more treacherous, and with each crack, a shiver ran down his spine, a dark premonition. He looked at Ksenia, the small, bent figure ahead, and wondered where such strength and wisdom came from. His own muscles screamed for rest, but the idea of failing, of leaving the elder alone to face the danger, was unthinkable. The faith that was once a thin thread now was a steel chain that bound him to that impossible journey, stronger than any fear. Ayana, with Yura still asleep and her face flushed by the intense cold, felt the weight of her son and the overwhelming fatigue that stole her strength. Her lips were chapped and her throat dry, but she continued to whisper words of encouragement to the reindeer around her, stroking their thick fur, trying to convey a calm she herself did not possess. The sound of the wolverines, which Ksenia had diverted, seemed to be returning, a distant growl that mingled with the howl of the biting wind, reminding everyone of the constant and relentless threat. She hugged Yura tighter, feeling the warmth of the small body, the promise of future he represented for the village. Ksenia felt the change in the air, a subtle vibration that was neither of the ice nor of the wind. It was the echo of hunger, the undeniable proximity of the predators. Her other senses, sharpened by decades of darkness, caught the strong yet unmistakable scent of the wolverines. They were approaching again, the distraction of the song beginning to lose its effect, the illusion unraveling. Time was running out quickly. The elder knew that the final stretch of the lake would be the most dangerous, an area where the subterranean currents were stronger, and the ice more treacherous and unpredictable. She raised her head, her lips moving in a new song, more potent, more desperate, a melody that seemed to tear the very soul from the earth and ice. Her feet, ignoring the searing pain, quickened their pace, dancing on the ice with a renewed and almost mystical urgency. She was weaving a new sonic veil, a last attempt to divert the predators while guiding the herd along a path that only she could feel, an invisible map drawn by ancestral wisdom. Boris felt the change in Ksenia's rhythm, the palpable urgency in her song. He looked back at the villagers, their faces pale and exhausted, but still following, propelled by the elder. "Faster!" he cried, his voice hoarse and almost inaudible, and the hunters redoubled their efforts, pushing the reindeer with a strength they did not know they possessed. A last breath of hope. Ayana felt her heart quicken in her chest. Ksenia's song was a flame that rekindled hope amidst despair, but the fear of the wolverines was a persistent and icy shadow. She looked at the elder, who now seemed a mythical figure dancing over the abyss, and a wave of admiration and reverence completely engulfed her. Ksenia was not just a guide, she was the very incarnation of her people's resilience, the strength that held them together. The ice beneath Ksenia began to groan in a different way, a sharper and continuous sound, like a lament of deep pain. She felt a network of micro-fissures spreading rapidly, invisible to the naked eye, but as clear to her sensitive feet as a detailed map. It was a minefield, and every step was a gamble against death. The lake was rebelling, and the time to cross it was running out quickly. The village was exhausted, but the unshakable faith in Ksenia was the only thing that kept them moving. The elder, with her bare feet and her soul connected to the earth, was the bridge between life and death, a beacon of courage in the icy darkness. She knew she needed one last effort, one last silent prayer, to lead them to the safety of the shore. The village was almost at the end of the lake, but the final stretch was the most treacherous and dangerous of all. Ksenia felt the lake writhe beneath her feet, an agony that mirrored her own. The blisters on her bare feet had burst, and every step was an ice blade piercing her flesh. but the physical pain was a whisper compared to the silent scream coming from the ice. A web of cracks deepened, and the dark water murmured closer to the surface. Her chant now was an almost broken thread, a melody that fought against the howl of the wind and the unmistakable sound of the wolverines, who were no longer distant. Their scent, heavy and wild, invaded the air, mingling with the icy breath of Yakutia. She knew the sonic veil had unraveled. They were coming. The shore, though visible to the others, seemed a distant mirage. Boris, his eyes fixed on Ksenia's bent figure, felt the ice beneath his boots tremble with an alarming frequency. He looked back at the villagers, their faces grey with exhaustion and terror. The murmur of panic was back, stronger, more desperate. He saw Ayana with Yura asleep stumble, but quickly regain her footing. Her eyes fixed on the elder. Their faith was at its limit, stretched to the maximum, but still there, a tightrope over the abyss. Boris gripped his axe. His body ached, but he could not fail. "Come on! Faster, my brothers! The shore is near!" he cried, his voice hoarse, trying to instill a hope he himself barely felt, but which was vital to keep the group moving. Ksenia, ignoring the clamor of the wolverines who now seemed to be just meters away, focused entirely on the ice. Her feet, bloody and frozen, were the extension of her soul. She felt the vibration of every water molecule, the memory of every current. The final stretch was a labyrinth of thin ice and loose blocks, a deadly trap. She raised her hands, not to the sky, but to the lake itself, as if to calm it, to plead for one last path. Her chant then erupted again, not as a distraction, but as a powerful prayer, an ancestral melody that spoke of life's resilience, of the unbreakable connection between the earth and her people. It was a sound that seemed to tear the very air, a melody that did not divert but affirmed their presence, defying danger with every note. Ayana, with Yura nestled against her neck, felt the air vibrate with Ksenia's new song. It was not a song of escape, but of confrontation, of defiance. She looked at the elder, who now seemed transfigured, her gestures broad and powerful, despite the fragility of her body. Fear was still there, a knot in her stomach, but Ksenia's melody was a balm, a promise that life, somehow, would find a way. She hugged Yura tighter, feeling the small heart beat against hers, and a new wave of determination engulfed her. For him, for all of them, she would continue, step by step, following the voice that was her only light. Ksenia, in a last and desperate effort, began to move in a zigzag, her bare feet finding almost impossible footholds. Leaping over fissures that opened and closed with the lake's breath, she felt the ice yield and rise again, a dangerous dance that required superhuman precision. The wolverines growled, the sound now so close it seemed to tear the very skin of the villagers, a premonition of hunger and fury. Panic was almost total, but Ksenia's voice, which seemed to come from within the earth itself, kept them in a trance of obedience, an invisible force that propelled them. She was a few meters from the shore, solid ground, salvation. But the last step was the most dangerous, the point where the ice, exhausted, seemed ready to surrender. The ice beneath her feet groaned, a final note of warning, a deep lament. She could not see, but she felt the shore, the promise of rock and solid snow, the hope of a new dawn. With a silent cry of pure effort, a last prayer that echoed in her soul, Ksenia took the final leap, her wounded feet finding solid ground, the safety so hard won. Relief, still fragile, began to spread. Ksenia, now on solid ground, did not stop. Her feet, which had danced over the ice with supernatural grace, now sank into the soft snow of the shore. Each movement a searing pang. The burst blisters burned, and the intense cold began to numb the pain, a blessing and a curse. She breathed deeply, the icy air burning her lungs, but an unshakable determination still propelled her. The shore was just one stage, The village, the true salvation, was still some distance away, and the growls of the wolverines, though somewhat muffled by distance and snow, were still a menacing presence. She felt the vibration of the earth, a comforting solidity that contrasted with the ice's betrayal, and raised her hands, not to the sky, but to the snow beneath her feet, as if to embrace the very earth that welcomed them. Boris, staggering, was one of the first to reach the shore, pulling one of the saved reindeer. He fell to his knees in the snow, exhausted, but his eyes, wet with tears and gratitude, fixed on Xenia. The elder did not look back, but her posture, though bent with fatigue, radiated a strength that seemed to defy nature itself. He rose with difficulty, the pain in his muscles a constant reminder of the journey, and began to help the other villagers disembark the reindeer, pushing them to the safety of the shore. The relief was a collective sigh, a murmur of hoarse voices that mingled with the sound of hooves in the snow. Ayana, with Yura still asleep on her back, felt the solid ground beneath her feet as the promise of a miracle. She allowed herself a brief moment of weakness, her legs trembling, her eyes closed as a solitary tear streamed down her cold-marked face. But the warmth of Yura's body, the sound of his soft breathing, brought her back. She opened her eyes and looked at Xenia, who was already moving again, her steps slow but firm, towards a small grove of frozen pines. The elder had not stopped, had not allowed a second of rest, knowing that danger still lurked. Ayana's faith, now, was more than a rock. It was the mountain itself. The wolverines, as Xenia had predicted, did not give up. The sound of the group regrouping on the ice, their growls of frustration and hunger echoing, was a cruel reminder that the battle was not over. Xenia felt the urgency in every fiber of her being. She needed to find shelter, a place where they could rest and protect themselves, even if for a brief moment. The pine grove, dense and dark, seemed the only option. She began to chant a new song, softer, more inviting, a melody that spoke of refuge and warmth, guiding the herd and the villagers into the protective darkness of the trees. Boris, realizing Xenia's intention, gave orders to the hunters to form a defensive barrier at the entrance to the grove, while the other villagers and the reindeer went deeper among the trees. The cold was intense, but adrenaline still coursed through his veins. He saw Xenia, the diminutive figure, stop under the shadow of an ancient pine, her feet bleeding, but her eyes, though blind, seeming to see beyond the darkness. She was the flame that guided them, the strength that held them together. Ayana, with Yura still in her arms, found a small space among the trees, protected from the biting wind. She sat in the snow, leaning against the trunk of a pine, and finally allowed herself a sigh of relief. Xenia, a few meters away, also sat, leaning against another trunk, her body trembling with exhaustion. The elder did not speak, but her chant, now an almost inaudible whisper, continued to weave a web of safety around them, a melody that promised that hope, even in the icy heart of Yakutia, would never die. The danger had not passed, but faith in Xenia had become unshakable. Xenia, leaning against the frozen pine trunk, felt the tremor of the earth beneath her wounded feet, not just the cold that numbed her, but the restless movement of the wolverines. The whisper of her song, which had previously woven an illusion of safety, now seemed fragile, almost swallowed by the howl of the wind and the growls that grew ever closer, more audible. She knew that the refuge in the grove was temporary, a fleeting pause before the final assault. Her other senses, sharpened by a lifetime of darkness, caught the vibration of hunger, the wild impatience that accumulated outside the pine barrier. The village, though at a distance that seemed impassable for her exhausted body, was the only hope, the only destination. She needed one last act of courage, one last melody to ward off the darkness. Boris, axe in hand, watched the darkness of the grove, his eyes fixed in the direction from which the growls came. His muscles screamed with pain, but the sight of Xenia, bent and fragile, yet with a determination that transcended life itself, rekindled the flame of hope in his chest. He saw the hunters, their faces pale and marked by exhaustion, but firm in their positions, ready to defend the herd and their families. Fear was a silent enemy, but faith in Xenia was an invisible armor. He pressed his lips together, his breath forming dense clouds in the icy air, and whispered words of encouragement to the men around him, a reminder of their promise to protect. Ayana, with Yura still asleep in her arms, felt her heart quicken with each growl that seemed to tear the veil of night. She hugged her son tighter, feeling the warmth of the small body, the promise of a future she fought to protect. Her eyes, wet with tiredness and apprehension, fixed on Xenia, who now rose slowly, her movements slow and painful, but imbued with a solemn gravity. The elder seemed to be gathering the last forces of her being, a silent prayer that manifested in every fiber of her body. Ayana felt a wave of admiration and reverence, an unshakable faith that propelled her to continue, to fight for every breath, for every step. Xenia, standing, raised her hands not to the sky but to the earth itself, as if to extract from it the ancestral strength of her people. Her feet bled, but the pain was an insignificant detail compared to the urgency of the moment. She inhaled deeply, the icy air filling her lungs, and then a new song erupted from her lips, not a whisper but a primordial cry, a melody that spoke of life's resilience, of the unbreakable connection between the earth and her people. It was a sound that seemed to tear the very air, a melody that did not divert but affirmed their presence, defying danger with every note. The wolverines for an instant fell silent, stunned by the force of that sound. Taking advantage of the predator's momentary hesitation, Xenia began to move again, her steps, though painful, imbued with renewed urgency. She did not run, but danced over the snow, her bare feet feeling every irregularity, every promise of a path. She guided the herd and the villagers out of the grove, not directly towards the village, but towards a narrow and winding gorge that she knew was the only safe path to salvation. It was a treacherous route, but the elder, with her ancestral wisdom, saw what eyes could not. Boris, understanding Xenia's intention, gave urgent orders to the hunters to follow the elder, protecting the reindeer and the villagers. The wolverines, recovered from the shock, began to growl again, but Xenia's song, now a beacon of sound, seemed to guide them away from the gorge, a powerful distraction that kept them at bay. Ayana, with Yura clutched against her, felt hope rekindle in her chest. The village was in sight, a cluster of flickering lights in the icy darkness. Xenia, with a last and desperate effort, led the herd into the gorge, salvation finally within reach. The climax of the journey was coming to an end, and Xenia's resilience had, once again, prevailed over the darkness. Xenia, in a final effort, led the herd into the gorge. The rocky walls rose like guardians, offering refuge. The air was dense, the wind muffled, but the cold persisted. Her wounded feet, almost numb, danced over the snow and ice, each step an act of faith. Her chant, now a murmur of gratitude, echoed, guiding herd and people. The village was near, felt by the smoke from the hearths and the vibration of hope beneath her feet. Boris, following Xenia, felt deep relief as he saw the village lights clearer. The gorge offered safety. He ordered the hunters to keep the reindeer moving. His muscles ached, but Xenia and the village infused him with strength. The villagers, exhausted, shone with hope. Faith in Xenia, tested to the limit, was now a burning flame in their hearts. Ayana, with Yura asleep and safe, felt fear loosen its grip. The village lights were a balm, a promise of warmth and rest. She looked at Xenia, who, though bent, radiated dignity and strength. A tear streamed down her face of overwhelming gratitude. She hugged Yura, feeling her son's soft breath, the future Xenia had saved. The elder was the incarnation of resilience, living proof that hope should never be abandoned. The wolverine's growls, previously tearing the air, became distant, muffled, lost in the howl of the wind. Xenia's distraction had worked. The predators, frustrated, gave up the chase, diverted by the labyrinth. The immediate threat had been overcome, and a collective sigh of relief ran through the group. Xenia felt the change in the air, the absence of the hungry vibration. A peace, fragile but profound, settled in her heart. Her feet bled and ached, but the pain was a small price for the life of her people. She raised her head, her lips curving into a faint smile, an almost imperceptible gesture, full of silent joy. The village was there, a few steps away, the promise of a new dawn. The first villagers, alerted by the noise and cries of relief, appeared at the entrance to the gorge, torches illuminating the darkness. Worried faces transformed into astonishment and tears of gratitude. Xenia, at the forefront, was the first to emerge, small but monumental, her bare and wounded feet, a silent testament to her impossible journey. Boris, his voice choked with emotion, helped Xenia with the last steps. "Xenia, you saved us," he whispered, and the village echoed his sentiment in a chorus of gratitude. Ayana, with Yura in her arms, approached, kneeling in the snow. She kissed Xenia's wounded hands, a gesture of deep reverence and unconditional love. The village was saved. The reindeer, exhausted, was safe. Xenia, with ancestral wisdom, unshakable faith, and superhuman courage, had guided her people through the darkness, proving that true vision lies in inner strength, human connection, and resilience that transcends what the eyes see. The flame of hope, lit by her, would burn forever in the heart of Yakutia. Xenia, wrapped in the warmth of soft furs, felt the firm ground of her yurt beneath her feet, a long-desired comfort. The aroma of herbal tea and birch smoke filled the air, a balm for her weary lungs. Her feet, once blades of pain, were now gently massaged by kind hands, the blisters treated with ancestral ointments. She did not see the faces around her, but she felt the presence of each one, the respectful silence, the palpable gratitude that radiated like warmth. It was the village her people saved. A deep sigh escaped her lips, a mixture of exhaustion and a peace she had not felt in a long time. Boris, kneeling beside Xenia, observed her wrinkled hands and feet, marked by the journey. His eyes were wet, not only from tiredness, but from an overwhelming emotion. He had seen death up close. He felt despair freeze his soul, but Xenia, the small blind elder, had been the light that guided them through the densest darkness. He took one of Xenia's hands, squeezing it with reverence. "Elder," he began, his voice hoarse, "there are no words to thank you. You are our guiding star, the guardian of our life." Xenia merely smiled, a faint smile that illuminated her aged face, and squeezed Boris's hand back, a silent communication of understanding and affection. Ayana, with Yura now asleep and safe in an improvised cradle, approached, her steps light. She sat at Xenia's feet, her head resting on the elder's knees, feeling the faint warmth that emanated from her. The tears, which had once been of fear and exhaustion, were now of pure gratitude and admiration. She closed her eyes, reliving the image of Xenia dancing on the cracked ice, her chant defying the winds and the predators. That image would be etched in her soul forever, a lesson of courage and faith. "Your voice brought us back, Xenia," Ayana whispered, her voice choked with emotion. "Your strength saved us." Xenia caressed Ayana's hair, a maternal gesture that conveyed all the love and wisdom accumulated in a lifetime. The night in the village was different. There was not the oppressive silence of fear, but the soft murmur of voices, the crackling of the hearths, the tranquil bleating of the reindeer now safe in the corrals. The community was gathered, sharing the little they had, but with hearts full of an invaluable richness. Life, The children, once hungry and frightened, now slept deeply, dreaming of a future that had almost been stolen from them. The story of Elder Senior, of the blind woman who saw the way where no one else could, would be told for generations, an epic of resilience and faith. Ksenia, feeling the quiet settle, knew her mission was complete. The pain in her feet diminished, replaced by a feeling of lightness. She had fulfilled her purpose, guided her people through the darkness, not with her eyes, but with her heart, with the wisdom that the earth whispered to her. True vision, she had always known, was not what was seen with the eyes, but what was felt with the soul. It was the connection with the earth, with the ancestors, with the unshakable strength of the human spirit. At dawn, the sun painted the sky in rosy and golden hues, a new day that seemed like a promise. The village awoke with a renewed sense of purpose. The reindeer, now fed and protected, were a living symbol of victory. Ksenia, though still fragile, sat near the hearth, her face serene. She was the spiritual compass, the living memory of her people, and her journey had etched into everyone's soul the eternal lesson that human resilience is the brightest flame in the icy heart of Yakutia. Hope, lit by her, would burn forever, a beacon of light in the darkness, proving that unshakable faith and human connection can overcome any abyss. The morning sun, now higher, bathed the village in a golden glow, melting the frost from the pine tops and revealing a scene of renewal. The air, though still biting, carried a new aroma, not just that of the hearth smoke, but of reindeer stew, prepared with what was left from the night before, warming hearts and stomachs. Ksenia, sitting in her place of honor near the fire, felt the warmth penetrate her tired bones. Her feet, though still sore, were wrapped in clean bandages, and the sensation of relief was a gift. She could hear the murmur of the village, the sound of reindeer hooves in the newly reinforced corrals, the voices of children playing, a sound that, for a time, she thought she would never hear again. Her face, marked by the wrinkles of age and trials, bore a deep serenity, a silent testament to the peace she had found. Boris, with straighter shoulders and a renewed sparkle in his eyes, coordinated the repair efforts. He and the other hunters, though exhausted, worked with an energy that seemed to come from an inexhaustible source. The corral fences were being mended, accumulated snow was removed, and provisions reorganized. He paused for a moment, observing Senior. Her image, small and blind, guiding them through the hell of ice, was indelibly etched in his mind. He approached, kneeling again beside her, a gesture of natural and deep respect. "Elder, the village is rising again, stronger than before," he said, his voice choked with emotion and gratitude. Ksenia extended her hand, and Boris held it, feeling the silent strength that emanated from her, a promise of continuity. Ayana, with Yura now awake and smiling in her arms, felt a lightness in her heart she hadn't experienced in a long time. Fear had dissipated, replaced by a gratitude that overflowed in every gaze. She walked to Senior, sitting at her feet. Yura extended a small hand to the elder, and Ksenia held it with tenderness, a gentle smile on her lips. "Ksenia, how can we ever repay all you've done for us?" Ayana asked, her eyes fixed on the elder's face, seeking an answer that transcended words. Ksenia merely shook her head gently, her smile deepening. "There is nothing to repay, my dear daughter. Life itself is the greatest gift, and the lesson learned, that indeed is the most valuable memory." The entire village felt this transformation. Winter, which had once been a constant threat, now seemed a harsh master that had taught them the true essence of unity and resilience. Families gathered more often, ancestors' stories were told with a new fervor, and each shared meal was an act of celebration. The scars of the journey, physical and emotional, would be constant reminders of what they had overcome. But more importantly, they would be living proof of the strength that resided in each of them, awakened by the singular courage of a woman who saw with her heart. Xenia, feeling the comforting warmth of the fire and the living presence of her people around her, knew that her physical journey had not ended there. She had lit a flame of hope, but it was the village, in its collective and renewed strength, that would keep it burning and alive forever. Her blindness, which once seemed a vulnerability, had become her greatest strength, allowing her to see beyond the visible, to feel the pulse of the earth and the deep soul of her people. She was the guardian of wisdom, the spiritual compass that would continue to guide, not with steps, but with the essence of her existence. The future in Yakutia would still be challenging, with harsh winters and dangers lurking in the shadows. But now, the village possessed something stronger than any blizzard or predator, an unshakable faith in themselves and in each other, a legacy forged in ice and courage. Xenia's story would be told and retold, not just as a tale of survival, but as a hymn to human resilience, an eternal proof that true vision lies in inner strength, unshakable faith, and connection that transcends what the eyes can see. The flame of hope, lit by her, would burn forever in the icy heart of Yakutia, a beacon of light that would never fade, illuminating the path of generations.